Welcome, everybody, to the Choices, Chances, Changes show with Georgie Dickins and Tran myself. This is going to be a dynamic podcast that explores the transformative power of personal and professional decisions. Join Georgie and I as we delve into stories of courage, resilience, and innovation featuring thought provoking conversations on navigating life's pivotal moments. From entrepreneurial journeys to personal growth strategies, we uncover insights that inspire positive change and empower passions or strategies to navigating challenges. Our show will have practical wisdom and real life experience to guide you on your journey of choices, chances, and changes. Georgie, welcome to the show. We finally made it happen.
This has been incubating for a number of months now, and a mutual friend connected us. And I remember when we met, we came away thinking, wow, that was a really inspiring conversation. And I think we both were sparking each other's thinking, and we thought, you know what, we want to bring this to more people. And you shared the word thought-provoking, and I think that's our intention. It's to catalyze people's thinking, to move people to action, and share some of the lessons, learnings, and insights, from our own careers, and equally that we've learned from others as well. So I'm excited, very excited. I realize my bow's right. I'm very excited for us to be here.
No, exactly. And Joey, one thing to talk about, bringing energy levels together, right? Like we don't realize that we're all balls of energies, and how we bring energies to ourselves and how we bring energies to others, and how when we meet someone that empowers or enhances our energy for wow, we gotta find something to work together with that individual. And that's really how this all started, right? From that perspective.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you say the word energy, because if you said to me 10 years ago, we're all energetic beings and we connect to energy, I'd have been like, okay, that sounds really woohoo. And I really recognize now the importance of energy. And interesting, when I wrote my book, my CEO book, I can't tell you every conversation I had with these founder entrepreneurs, I came away a different human being. It moved my thinking. I was coming away with new questions I was asking myself. And it really underscored the importance to me of the power of connection and who you surround yourself with. And I think energy, we often don't recognize the importance of energy. And interestingly, just recently, actually, a client shared with me that your energy introduces you before you even speak. So to your point, we're energetic beings, and how we show up, our mood, our attitude, our behavior, that really strongly influences, I think, the perception that people have of us.
No, totally. So as part of the show was, choices, chances, changes, I think it'd be interesting for both of us to talk about those three topics on how we end up being who we are. Because look, we are a collection of all these three things through our lifetime to get us to where we are now, right? So, ladies first, why don't you start in terms of how do you get to where you get to based on, pivotal moments and choices, chances, and changes that you made in your life?
It's a really good question, because I think there's been so many defining moments in my life, and whether I realized they were defining at the time, I'm not sure, but I can certainly reflect back and acknowledge those pivotal moments that have led me to where I am today. I had 20 years in financial services, and I loved working in the industry. It was dynamic, it was forward-looking, it was innovative, it was an exciting time to be part of the markets. However, for probably the last decade that I was working in the markets, every 2 years I found myself knocking on the doctor's door. I'd had skin cancer, I'd had miscarriages, I'd had an overactive thyroid, because I was going so hard in life. I'm by nature a perfectionist. I'm by nature an overachiever, which has a strength. There's a huge strength there, but it also has a shadow side if it's left unchecked. And I was really bumping up against that burnout, but I've normalized it, because everyone in the industry, well, it felt like everyone, I know everyone's a big statement, but everyone was like, go hard. And that go hard attitude of, actually it worked, because I was rising in my career. I was getting paid up year on year. So the validation was like, this is a great recipe card. This pattern of behavior is brilliant. However, my doctor had a very different view to my organization, which is when you look at your notes, you're on this pattern repeat of go hard, burn out, get sick, rest, recover, repeat. So it just wasn't, I can reflect back and think, you know what, that wasn't a pattern that worked. And yet I knew I needed to change, which was the word change. I knew I needed to change. But when you're in that busy, constant throughput of life, I think sometimes that path of least resistance, even if it's not serving you, there can be comfort in the discomfort. But on one particular visit, I went back to the doctors, and this was like an every 2-year cycle. And again, I think he's like, you're not making any changes. You're not making positive choices. You're doing the same things, going working as hard, and yet you're expecting a different outcome. And I realize now that your inputs in life completely correlate to your outputs. So, you can't expect to feel fit, healthy, well, full of vitality if actually all the inputs are not sleeping, sacrificing sleep for more hours worked, on planes all the time, making, stress being your constant companion in life. And on this particular occasion, I think he was just irritated. When is this person going to take her life seriously? When is, I'm giving her the insight to, help her make these positive changes. And I was then pretty much in burnout phase. And the doctor at that point said to me, if you do not make changes in your life, you are not going to see your children grow up. And anyone who's a parent, it was, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was suddenly when two people who are 8 and 6, who I care about so deeply, as soon as I thought they were going to be impacted, I was like, you know what, I'm now listening. You have my full attention. And it was that life event that actually I was in burnout phase. And because I think what irritated him was he said, you need to take a week off work. I'm like, no one takes a week off work. Like, we were going sick. Like, a week is... And he's like, no, like, you need to take a week off work. And as soon as he gave me permission, or I gave myself permission maybe, it was the time and space I needed. And I never had time and space. But that time gave me the space to self-reflect, to be like, what are the choices I'm making in life? Because I was on autopilot. I was that hamster on the wheel, going so fast. But that's when my health was such a big challenge for me. But also it was a savior, because I'm not in choice. I'm seeing my motivations as title and status and money, but actually, what about health? What about well-being? What about being around for my children? So that was a defining moment that led me to create and be purposeful and to reconnect to my why. And I think our why and our motivations and drivers, they change over time. And we don't always periodically go back and review and check in on them. But that gave me the space. And I got a coach that helped me with that process to hold the mirror up. And it was such a deeply transformative time in my life. And it's just, I often have to remind myself, don't wait for a life event to make the positive changes, to make the positive choices. Create the space. No one's going to create that space for you. You have to be intentional, you have to be deliberate, you have to track these things. Because otherwise there's no change without change. You'll just carry on this default path. So for me, I wanted to take agency and ownership, and that led me to moving into setting up my business as a coach and trusted advisor to C-suite leaders. And now I'm in the world of making choices and changes every day, because I'm in that area of wanting to grow and do things differently and leave a lasting impact on people's lives as well.
No, it is interesting, right? Because I don't think we realize, like, the way we are, who we are in our 20s and 30s and 40s, it changes. Our perspective changes. And a lot of times we think we know ourselves, but we don't go back and learn about our new selves because new experiences have come our way, new ingredients have come our way. And so in a way, we always think like we're the same ingredient we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever the case is. It's not. We've evolved into something else, right? Given the experience we face in life.
And when I was in my early 20s, like, money was really important to me because I wanted to buy a house, I wanted to get married, but your motivations and drivers, they do change over time. Like, they do change. and different people, you see different things come into your life, people, children, and your time. So therefore I think time doesn't give refunds. And so time is one of our biggest assets. It's a non-renewable resource. And you spoke, and I want to hear about your origin story and your pivotal moments. But one of the things that in one of our conversations that really I found very inspiring is the fact that you track how and where you spend your time. It's so intentional, it's so purposeful to make sure you're spending the time on the things that matter. And I think being deliberate and consistent in that is so critical. And I don't think many people do that.
No, so yeah, so you give away my secret in life. No, but in all seriousness, look, if you're saying time is an asset, I literally track it as part of my portfolio, right? I have a time portfolio, and the good news about time portfolio is we're all equal when it comes to time, right? 24 hours a day,
yeah,
for everybody, right? And in a lot of cases, we say time is important, but yet we don't track it, and we're not deliberate about what we do. I think intentions matter because you don't want to do things for the sake of doing things. You want to do things with a purpose. And I do think at times, because not getting that clarity what that purpose means, decisions and choices we make ends up being harder. But if you have a clear purpose on what is it that matters to you, what is it you want to achieve, then making those choices and taking those chances are quite calculated, right? Quite intentional.
They say what you put your attention on expands in your life, and what gets measured improves. And I think your inventory system for tracking time, given it is an asset. I mean, how many people track time? But and I think it's also knowing your priorities, because it's knowing what your priorities are and then tracking the time against those. Looking at your diary, is my diary reflective of what I say is important to me? If I say family is important to me, where in my diary am I spending, purposefully spending time with my family and with that high quality level of attention or connection?
No, that's exactly it. Because you talk to so many people, it's like, what's the top 5 most important things in your life? Okay, I'm like, let me take your phone. I take the phone, like, why are you spending like 90% of your time on the phone watching social media? Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't align with what you're saying is important. And a lot of times we end up being, I told like consumer versus creator, right? Price taker versus market maker, where a lot of times people just go with the flow and they end up spending so much time consuming versus creating, right? It is up to, what I love about like life is, at any moment, at whatever state you are, it is up to you to make a decision and a choice that will change the direction of where you're going. And these things compound. So if you do enough of it with intention, right, it compounds to a certain direction you want. But if you're living life where you're saying, I'm giving the remote control to whomever is holding it, right, whether it's the entertainment of the day or the news of the day, whatever the case is, well, you kind of lost the plot, right?
And the word that I wrote down there listening to you was lazy ambitious. I think often we want those achievements, we want the successes, but it is about being, used the word creator. And when I look at extraordinary performers, and you and I, we know many of them, that what is the difference that makes a difference? And they are creators. They are truly creators, because we can live a life by default or we can live a life by design. And that design, it goes back to your intentionality. It's being intentional. It's being deliberate with our choices, who we spend time with. And it's, to your point, it's those small things, sometimes those small choices, those small decisions that you think in isolation are small, but they have this, they amplify. They are far greater in terms of the impact and influence they have on your life versus the actual, the doing of it itself.
No, exactly. Like, I tell you about my, the antisocial phase of my life, right? Like, Kit's the one friend where there's a party, Kit's not going to show, or like, I never see him, right? And a lot of times it's about just understanding your purpose, your intention, and taking a lot of actions, right? And don't get lazy about it. And a lot of times we go, oh, I'm not going to go to that event because I got to get dressed, I got to take the train, I got to do this, or, and a lot of times we always find excuses why not to do something.
Yeah.
And then we end up, things don't go our way. We end up blaming the world versus owning it. Because look, life is like, to me, what I love about life is life is like, I'm the writer, I'm the producer, I'm the actor, right? It's me. It's a one person show.
Yeah.
And so unless you see that and unless you own it and you say, okay, what is it that I want and what are the decisions am I making, what activities I'm doing? And it's up to me to own it. And look, owning it and guaranteeing are two things, right? I think that's why people get frustrated to say, I made a decision and the outcome didn't happen. Well, outcomes are not guaranteed. But if you don't make that decision, I guarantee you that outcome will not happen. But if you made a decision and you made a point of doing something about it, at least there's a chance of it happening. And you do enough of it, that chance increases. And all of a sudden, you fast forward 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and you're deliberate about what you eat and how active you are. Oh, you end up being in good shape, right? And I think people miss that point at times.
Yeah, it 100%. And to circle back on, you're often the person that doesn't go to the party or didn't used to go to the party. I think it goes back to that time. Because I often have clients who speak to the fact that I just don't have any time. The demands of me are outstripped by my capacity, and I think it comes back to going to parties, social events, committing to meetings. It's just reminding ourselves that no is a choice and yes is a scale of commitment. It's the showing up, it's the getting ready, it's the being there, it's the engagement. So it has to be really worth your time. And there was a quote that's just coming up for me listening to you, which is, it's put yourself in a position for serendipity. So it is, I think, sometimes just to check in. If you're an island and you don't connect with people, you don't attend events, then you know what, you're probably going to limit the heights you can reach, because we're social beings. So I think it's been really thoughtful around, what are the places and spaces and who are the people I want to connect with to put myself in those positions of serendipity, because it could be one chance conversation, one kind of chance encounter that can put you on a whole different pathway.
It totally is. And by the way, so I know I drag on to go to my origin story, but I got my first job at BlackRock because I made a decision, maybe it was by accident, by luck that day, to go to an event where I met somebody and they said, hey, by the way, one of the senior guy at BlackRock went to Binghamton and he constantly comes back to recruit, right? And then because of the conversation, I then went and tracked down that event to then be able to be interviewed to get my first job at BlackRock. Now, had I not decided to make that meeting and go out and do the things I did, I would not have landed my first job, right? Be in the industry and have my start. And it's these little things that you don't realize made the difference, right? It's like little decisions that we underestimate daily, and we go, wait a minute, the outcome of who I end up becoming can change drastically. And at the moment we never realize it, right? But it's these little things that do count, and unless we inventory, unless we're more aware of it, we'll just end up ping pong through life, handing someone else the remote, right?
I do think that event at BlackRock is also, there was something intuitively that spoke to you that said I should be there, and so there is our intuition is our internal GPS. So it is listening to that, because sometimes our head can be like, oh no, I don't, I shouldn't go, it won't be valuable. But the intuition will guide you if you listen to it. And if you want to get ahead, if you want to, then it is about meeting people and connecting with people and putting yourself in those positions. And I always say, I always encourage people to think, what's their next role ahead of them, or what's the next thing they want to create and achieve, and who are people already doing that, and where do they hang out? What are the tables they're sitting at? What are the places they're hanging out? Because again, it goes back to being the conscious creator. And it's interesting because you use the word strategy at the beginning, and there's one thing knowing, there's quite another thing doing, because sometimes we know this stuff, but actually it requires action. The same way that a business plan, there's a strategy, but then there's an execution plan as well. We've got to do the work. We can't, otherwise the words are just brilliant words on a piece, on a piece of paper.
No, and a lot of it is also, it's fear, right? Like I remember this. Like this was so. Look, I was part of IHS Market, right? I joined in early 05, and I was there for 17 years. And I remember this was like 08, 09. I was senior. I was a director, right, at the firm. But I was always worried about public speaking, like speaking in front of all the MDs, speaking in front of all the directors, because I'm always worried about like, am I saying something wrong? And you go to a meeting and you have an idea. It's like, hey, I should bring this up, and you didn't. And then all of a sudden, half an hour later, someone brought it up, and they look like amazingly smart for bringing it up. And at the time, I went to my head of HR, because back then, we were a startup, right? We were pretty fluid, and so I was like, oh, Raj, and his name is Raj. I'm like, I have an issue. It's like, what do you mean? Like, I don't know how to talk in front of people, or especially people that are more senior than me. What do I do? Right? And a lot of times it's that perceived fear of sounding stupid, right? That perceived fear of saying, not knowing enough. And the truth is, one of the models I've ended up learning and adopting, not sure it's right or wrong, but rarely right, always confident, right?
Rarely right, I like that. Rarely right, always confident.
and it's really about, look, the perspective you have is who you are. You can't hide who you are. You can't be something else you're not, right? As long as what you're doing or saying comes from a assumed positive intent, and your intentions are well, and your expertise, what is there to worry about, right? It's not like you say something wrong, someone's gonna put you in a headlock, right? That's not gonna happen. But it's that fear that gets to all of us, and I think it's that fear that prevents us from making those decisions, those choices, and these little decisions that we make. And honestly, after that, I end up in every meeting, right, making the choice to say something. Mm-hmm. And then as I say once or twice, I end up getting used to now speaking, and all of a sudden speaking to crowds of hundreds of thousands of tens of thousands. And now I'm on a podcast with you, right? Which hopefully this goes to millions. But this is like, it's that risk factor that we always face, and that's fear factor, I think.
And several things, because I'm a writer, like I write down when I hear things that spark for me. There was a stat, and this is about females, but it said that 70% of women would rather have root canal surgery than speak in public. Now, I have not had root canal surgery, but I think it's probably fairly painful. So the public speaking thing, I think it really, that's a real fear for many of us. And with fear isn't real. We can't touch it. I can't pick up fear and try and massage it. But it's a felt experience. And I've always loved the acronym for fear, which is false evidence appearing real, because that false evidence appearing real, it's the fear is public speaking. I used to have a real fear of public speaking. I didn't want to look stupid. I didn't want to look like, I was worried about filler words. I didn't want to, again, I was fearful of judgment, fearful of what people might think about me, fear if I just looked inadequate in some way. So that chimp on my shoulder was a real badass, but not a nice badass, just one that was dialed up on full volume. And I listened to that voice as if it were true. The one that's like, don't speak up, don't speak up in a team meeting, don't take this, the position on the stage, you're not good enough, it's all going to go horribly wrong. But that's, what is the evidence to support or refute that? Because sometimes we live in the story, but it's a story, it's an assumption. It's and we're great Oscar-winning story writers. So now that, false evidence appearing real, I think it's just acknowledging fear. Fear is trying to protect us. It's, if you were to climb up Everest without any safety equipment, and your voice is saying, don't do it, don't do it, Kiet. That could be really scary and dangerous. Listen to it, because fear is really good. I think it's got such, you use the word intent, it's got such positive intent. But I choose the acronym FEAR, which is feel everything and rise. So that feel everything and rise, acknowledge it. It's there, it's trying to help me. But what you did is you confronted it. Every opportunity you gave, I'll ask a question. And the more you exercise that muscle, it's a bit like if you want to get a six pack, you've got to exercise the muscles. They doesn't just materials, magically happen. And the same is true, for example, in that situation. And out of interest, was it as bad? What was your? I'd be curious around what were you afraid of, and was it as bad as you thought when you then started speaking up more and started putting yourself into that kind of realm of discomfort?
Well, I think part of it is funny. Part of it is, you always think people are thinking about you and judging you, and then when you get older, you realize no one's really thinking about you at all, right? and that's the reality. And so for me, it was just doing more and more of it, and not get too worried about people's perception, because it's really about whatever I'm saying, it comes from a positive intent. Right? It is the real authentic me, it is the authentic view that I'm providing. And as long as it comes from that, mindset, I have nothing to worry about. Right. And so for me, it was getting used to that. And look, part of it was, and I see this happen a lot, is we always get comfortable and we're not used to the uncomfortable moments. But it's the uncomfortable moment that helps us grow and improve. And so for me, it's just being able to do that and feeling that uncomfort. And now it's actually, I'm pretty comfortable speaking in crowds, right? I just need to stop talking because sometimes I talk too much, right? But that comfort then allows me to say, what's the next level of uncomfort? Well, it's doing a live show with Georgie Dickins, the legend, right? And it's really about how do you get yourself into uncomfort moments to grow, right? And really having that clarity and intent to say, it's fearful, but I have the courage to do it, right?
Yeah.
Courage is doing something while you're still fearful of it. And I think we all need to realize that, embracing that uncomfort is really, really what drives growth at the end of the day, right?
When I look back at some of my, I suppose, moments that have really, in my career, that have, working at JP Morgan, doing my first TEDx talk, doing my first live TV interview, getting promoted, like some of these really pivotal moments, I was really scared. I was really scared doing my TEDx talk. I was really scared when I started at JP Morgan, because I was like, wow, am I good enough to be here? I didn't come from Cambridge or Oxbridge. I felt inferior. I felt like an outsider. So I was scared. And what I suppose realized in my 40s, and it's taken me a couple of decades to realize, but when I'm scared, that's when I'm learning and growing, in that kind of personal growth setting. And so actually, if I feel a little bit scared, that tells me I'm on the right path, because I'm stretching, I'm growing, I'm learning, it's new skills. The same way if I'm going to, when I did my skydive, I was scared, but the feeling I had when I finished was, incredible. The same when I ran a marathon, I was scared, but I think feeling fearful or afraid, it's how you engage with that, because some people then try and pull back or resist it, and actually there'll be certain situations where I listen to it, and other times I think, again, it's not a bad thing. Embrace it, make it a friend. It's not a foe.
Yeah, I guess the real question is the driving force behind making a choice. Right, because a lot of times, you talk about, like, your why and your push, right? And and everything I do is my why and my push. But the question I'm sure everyone's listening is to say, well, how do I know it's the right time to make the choice? Or, what are the signals I need to search for to say, hey, it's time for me to make a move, or whatever the case may be. And one of the things you and I talked about before this was, I don't think a lot of people realize this. We rotate around the axis on Earth 17,000 kilometers an hour. We then move around the sun 108,000 kilometers an hour. And then the solar system moves within the Milky Way galaxy. And then the galaxy itself moves within the universe. So reality is everything's changing around us. And that's the external, right? But what's difficult is making that internalization say, now it's time to make a choice. Now it's time to make the change. Like, what should people look for as signals to say, now is the time, in your view?
Yeah, and it's because sometimes the signals are there, but we don't hear them. There are signals all around us, but we're so busy. It's a bit like, head down. It's exercising that peripheral vision so you can see the signals. A lot of my clients, what they do, and I try and do this myself, and I'm probably like an 8 out of 10. So there's still room for improvement. But having a mini board meeting with myself, the same way that you speak to your board, and because I think sometimes, the choices you want to, well, for me, I think it's coming from a place of, when you're making a choice, it's considered and thoughtful. It's not a knee-jerk reaction, because sometimes we can, let's say, have a bad day at work or something doesn't go our way, and we can be emotionally reactive. Now, that's not helpful. So it's about being considered, being thoughtful. And I think that mini board meeting with yourself is an opportunity to pose some really thought-provoking questions. What does success mean to me? What do I care about? What matters? What are the priorities in my life? It's incredible how many people can't speak to what their priorities are. And equally, as you get older and you have more experiences, you've got more skills, there are so many things you can do. Like if you were going for a different, creating a different company now, Kiet, there's so many different sectors, different roles you could have in that company. So many things you can do. But what do you actually want to do? And I think, so that mini board meeting, it's then being really purposeful with that time. And equally, sometimes if you struggle with asking yourself those questions, having a coach or a trusted friend, a bit like, we've had conversations, just, but asking each other questions to go from the head to really uncover what's more deeply there that maybe you haven't got access to. There's a disconnect.
I love that idea, having your own personal board, right? Because a lot of times, like, we have blind spots, but the reality is you don't have to do this yourself.
No.
Right? We always think like we're on our own journey. No, look, it's up to us to make the ultimate decision. But the fact finding, the discovery, and the process, right? We can get help. Right, to your point, like either your personal board based on people or working with a coach, right? There are ways around it to really help you get through a lot of these things. But a lot of times it's we're always trying to find the signal ourselves, and sometimes it's hard, right?
And it's interesting, those signals, like my burnout, I had loads of signals. I didn't hear them, I didn't see them, because I was so in the weeds of life. And I talk about with some of my clients, I talk about eagles and pigeons. And sometimes it's about being a pigeon, you're kind of in the weeds, but other times you need to be that eagle. And if you think about an eagle, it rises above the noise. It gets perspective. It gets to, because it soars at that high altitude. And the same is true when we're so busy and we're in, many of us have become human doings rather than human beings, because we are doing all of the time. So how do you create that space to move above the noise, to get perspective? And to reiterate what you said, you don't have to do it alone. I think it's having people, internal, like an internal board of directors. Some people reference it as their trusted tribe. And it's having also like a mirror. I've got friends of mine who are mirrors, who we can't always see ourselves objectively, the good things and the bad things. It's when I do 360s for clients, and I often share their core skills and attributes, there's sometimes some resistance because they're not fully aware of why their star is shining incredibly brightly. So those mirrors, I think, can give you insight. And equally having sounding boards to test your ideas out. So you because sometimes these sounding boards can ask you questions that maybe you hadn't thought about asking yourself.
No, that's right. It was funny about signals. So I was at a family wedding. It was a wedding of a family member. And during that event, I was trying to close a big deal. So I was on the phone the whole time. And there was this picture that someone captured of my daughter trying to get my attention, yet I was on the phone. And then they sent me the photo. And that photo was a signal to me to say, wake up, right? And it's little things like that at times, when we raise our awareness and then ask the next question and next question and next question to really rediscover our why, right? And it's important to say, you know what? Sometimes the people that say things about you to help you rise and be a better person, right, are not bad people. They're here to try to help you, right? You may not like to hear it, but listen to it.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, like that picture, like changed my life. Picture was taken 8 years ago, right? And it's really led me to who I am today for the most part.
But the key thing there is, Kit, someone's shared a picture with you, and you could have easily been, picture on the phone, wasn't with my, wasn't spending quality time with my family, and just let that go. But you chose to be a really powerful moment for you to be like, okay, what are my priorities? And and you were able to look at yourself from the outside in, because there's a picture of you, and so hence there's the knowing and doing. You were aware in the moment once you saw the picture, but then that's now informed how you show up differently, maybe with your children, how you show up at family events. So you're not that person who's in the picture, closing a deal on their phone.
No, that's exactly it. And it was that instant moment and the decisions I make, series of decisions after that, right? But it really starts with, and a lot of times we live through life, and you and I tell us, I'm gonna bore the audience with this. We actually have 3 brains, right? We have the reptilian brain, and so the whole time you and I are talking, we're breathing, right? These are natural instincts, right? Because our bodies create these auto systems we don't have to worry about all the time, right? This comes from millions of years of evolution. And then we have the amygdala. The amygdala is the piece of the brain that controls our emotions. And tied right next to the amygdala is the hippocampus. Hippocampus controls our memories, right? And as I learned about this, right, look, the amygdala was created so that, hey, we see a tiger, drive your emotion, get your body going, run, right, for your life. A lot of these fears that we have is no longer the case. And so for us, at least my personal view is, the key to life is learning how to control that amygdala, right, that emotion. Because if we do, and we get the level of clarity, right, that's when we can use our neocortex, like our logic brain, the most. And what happened is, like, at least in my part, was I got myself to an auto mode. And so I wasn't really fully aware, right? And that's what we typically do, right? We want to automate our process. Our brain does the same thing. So at times we'll go through life through a blur. I'm not sure you've had this, but like in the early days of my life, I would like go through a week, a month, or even 6 months and not realize what happened during that 6 months, right? I was on autopilot. And making the decision not to be an autopilot and being more aware, right? And increasing your sensory acuity and trying to be present more. That's what made the difference. And so, like, from looking at that picture, I'm like, I have to make a choice. How do I be more present? How do I not be here and think about what happened yesterday or worry about what's going to happen tomorrow, but enjoy the moment now?
Yeah.
Right. And that picture really woke me up from that perspective.
It reminds me of the Kung Fu Panda quote, but it's like it talks about now being a gift. That's why they call it the present. And it's interesting. My dad passed away last year after a very sudden and quick illness, and I wish sometimes it wasn't life events that forced us to, but it did force me to kind of reappraise and reevaluate. And you realize the present moment is a gift. I mean, when you wake up, the fact you wake up, there's a gift. The fact you can see, talk, walk, these are all gifts. And there's so many things we get to do, and yet in life. And I think it's just having that gratitude, because no one's got the gift of tomorrow. Like no one's got that guaranteed. So, where we can, coming from that place, we said the word before, like intentionality. And that it often requires us to be deliberate, because there's so many things competing for our attention, our devices, our emails, our messaging, people. So actually being present is really hard to do. But again, it's like that muscle. The more you exercise it, like, what is quality of connection with the people you love and care about? What does that actually feel like, look like? and then really cultivating that, because I think often, to your point, we can be on that autopilot. And it's interesting the story you said, like sometimes you could go a week or a month back in the day and you'd be like, what happened? And I remember my first job out of university was working at Reuters, and they had an office in a place called Thomas More Square in London. And every day I'd get off my train and I'd walk from the train to the office, and I walked past the Tower of London and London Bridge every day. So pretty iconic historical sites in London. And I remember on one particular day, my mum, I don't know why, but she walked she was walking into the office with me, and she's like, oh my God, your walk is amazing. You've got the Tower of London, you've got London Bridge. And I'm like, oh yeah, I suppose I have. But I completely was in my zone, in my headspace. And it's so often we're not, to your point, that kind of acuity, we're just not aware. And I still go in there. I don't get me wrong. I drove home today from the train station, and I, again, autopilot, because I think it's sometimes to be present, it's like we have to switch it on and be really intentional around it.
No, and okay, so here's an irony. So after that picture, I went through a phase of self-discovery, and was more deliberate, more intention without what I was doing, and be more mindful. And fast forward 12 months, I made partner, and I made the most money I've ever made in my life because of it. And it was because I was intentional with what I'm doing. And I realized that a lot of times we always say, hey, work's work, life's life. Person, I have 2 me or 3 me's. You don't. There's only one you. Bring that same you to where you are. And the more authentic you bring to the table, right, the more value you create around you. And in a way, I need to thank that friend for the photo, but it actually helped me, have a better personal life. But in a way, it helped enhance my professional life as well, without realizing. You would imagine, okay, so you fall back, you did last extension. I end up doing much better because of it, right? Because I'm much more mindful. And I don't think people realize that, right?
But the point you made earlier, you said it's the small changes that can have the biggest impact. So you don't sometimes recognize at the time that ripple of impact that it can create across all aspects of your life, because you're probably more nourished, more balanced, you've got better connections with those you love more dearly, or most dearly. So everyone wins. You show up probably more energetic, more enthused. Like so it is those and those small shifts and small choices. They'll be different for everyone, but it is about making those small choices. And I think often people feel or think that small choices don't really matter. But you said before, they compound over time. And it's the same when we're looking at behavioral change. Let's say you want to be more confident, or you want to be more assertive. It's those small changes that then ultimately get you to where you want to get to. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think we often want the things that we desire. We want things quickly, and actually it's exercising that patient urgency, and doing the work that's going to get us there.
No, exactly. And it's funny. So, as part of our company model, we say work is a verb, not a noun.
Ooh, I like that.
It's not bound by time nor location, but it's bound by outcome and results. And to your point, I'm not sure you've had. I remember this where I had projects where it just took me a month and I can't do it or get it done. But it's for some quirk, all of a sudden I'm in the zone.
Yeah.
And I'm like flying through. Within an hour, I can do a week or a month's worth of work, right? And it's really about how do you get yourself in the zone? And highlighting the point you said, it was, I am much more aware, I'm much more fulfilled personally. And so when I come in professionally, I am coming in sharp as ever.
Yeah.
Right. Versus before, I was on autopilot. Even though I was there, I was not there. Right. And that made the difference. And so even though maybe I'm working less hours, but despite the less hours, I'm providing 10 times the output, because that's also how effective I am. Right. And I don't think people understand that.
I think it's leverage those moments when they come, because I know when I'm in a zone of creativity, whether it's ideas or I'm like, I've just got to capture it, because if I try and wait, if I be like, do you know what, I'll do that tomorrow, it's like it may not come. And I think it's also recognizing, where do you do your best blue sky thinking? Whether it's you're thinking about a next step in your career, you're thinking about a project at work, like where do you do your best blue sky thinking? And sometimes that's locking yourself away in a room. Sometimes it's going away, just going out for a walk. But where can you create the spaces away away from a bit of the chaos? Because there's so much chaos, there's so much noise, more so than. And there's a stat, and I'm going to really not relay this correctly, but I read a book recently, and it talked about our parents' generation. So I'm 45, my parents in the mid-70s. About how much information they consumed on a daily basis. And it was something like 3 newspapers worth in terms of TV. And, they had a newspaper every day, watched the news 3 times a day. I can't remember, but it's not even 10x. It's probably like 100x versus how much information we take in now. And there is a saying called digital dementia, which really gives me a bit of reassurance that when I forget things, it's not actually something serious. It's just because I'm on a device too much. And all these advances in technology, they're incredible. The fact you and I can do this podcast, in different time zones, different locations, incredible. The fact people can connect to us, from anywhere around the world, amazing. There's a shadow side. It's that feeling like we're always on, 24/7 contactable. And when I started in my career, and I was at Reuters, then I went to ICAT. I remember I lobbied really hard to get a BlackBerry, because the BlackBerry was indicative, and it was the device, which is a phone. It had basic email. That was indicative if you were someone that was fairly important in the company, if you had a BlackBerry. And so I was so excited to get this BlackBerry, because I was in sales. I was deemed eligible to have a BlackBerry. And I used to get really excited when the red light flashed, because it meant I had an email. Whereas now, many clients in the corporate world, my clients in the corporate world, will get 400 to 500 emails a day. So how do you even go through all those emails? So I don't even know what my first point was, but it was about, it's recognizing we're in information overload. So, where can you create the space? Because otherwise you're in the noise, and we all need time to connect our creative dots.
No, you do. And I think you hit it right on point. It's like, for me, like early in the morning, I do my best thinking, right? That's why my wife's always like, why are you up at 4:30 in the morning? What is wrong with you? I'm like, well, that's why I do my best thinking, right? But it's also, one of the things that I think we don't do enough of as people in general is, before we leave the house, right? We check the mirror. Do we look good? Are we well dressed? Do we smell well? We don't spend enough time to think about, well, it's our mindset in the right place. And so I do a lot of mindset exercise in the morning myself, right? Where I inventory, to me, the gratitude I have in life. Look, I have an amazing life. I am lucky. People say, but kid, why are you lucky? Like you live in a refugee camp. But I'm lucky. I had the luck to come to America. I had the luck to be who I am today, right? Yes, I put in the work, but let's be real. A lot of this is luck, right? A lot of this is unseen forces that's got me here. So I'm very appreciative of everything I have. And so it's really about having a sense of gratitude. So in the morning, I list out like the positive gratitude, right, that comes through me. I look through the inventory of people I have in my life. I look through the things I want to achieve for me now in the day, and the things I need to achieve where 6 months from now, I'll thank myself for doing it today. So before I leave the house, I have a deliberate intention to understanding what that day is, right? And for me, it's early morning that allows me to do that, and that inventory on a daily basis. And I do think, that's something that I would encourage more people to do, to say, don't leave the house keeping your physical in check, but keep your mind in check as well. I think that's going to be very important.
Yeah, and I think people are either morning larks or night owls. I'm like you, I'm a morning lark. And like, I might come like 9 o'clock in the evening. There's not so much going on with my brain cells, but in the morning I'm very awake. And I remember probably like 15 years ago reading a book called The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. And it was a complete game changer, because I used to just get up, I'd have breakfast, I'd go to work. Whereas this was the power of, he had like 4 10-minute blocks, and one was scribing, was writing, one was exercising. I'll have to go back to list the 4, to revisit the 4. But it was about that really setting yourself up for success. And I don't know whether this was his quote or if I've heard it from someone else, but it was like, win the morning, win the day. And that for me, that morning, even if it's 10 minutes that I get to spend on mindset and intentionality, that is the rudder of my day. That strongly influences how I make decisions. It strongly influences my patience levels. It strongly influences how reactive I am if there's there's an event. And I never appreciated the importance of the morning. And like you, I do my gratitudes because I've done those for years. And my sons often say, like, 5 fingers, right? Things you're grateful for. And then I'm grateful for a house, so I'm not getting them to go even more specific, because gratitude has a really extraordinary energy associated with it. And I think when we take the time to be grateful, we then really see what there is to be grateful for, because it encourages us then, subconsciously to be scanning our environment to look for points and moments of gratitude. And typically there are so many. For a lot of us, there's also lots of things that aren't great. So it's trying to sometimes, offset that with making sure you're focusing on the good things too.
No, exactly. So Georgie, that was great. That was fun. So how do we want to end this? Like, how do we want the audience to come help us on this?
Well, I think that this is going to be really organic and iterative. Kiet and I have got hours and hours worth of conversations that we will be having together. And equally, I think if there's a topic, if there's a theme, if there's a certain subject that's front of mind for you and you'd really value hearing us speak to, then let us know. Equally, we will be inviting guests on our podcast. So if there's a guest you think it would be really interesting for us to spend time with, please again share names with us. So this comes from such a place of good energy, this show, and I think I'm excited to be part of it, because Kiet, listening to you, I'm learning. I've made loads of notes as I'm listening to you. So we're just open to evolving this in a way that's really going to have the greatest impact for those listening.
No, exactly. I've learned a lot from you today as well, and this is just great positive energy. And I'm thankful for this opportunity, because I do see this being something extremely amazing. And I just want to say to the audience, thank you for listening to our first episode, and thank you for your continued support going forward. Georgie and I will continue to create great content to really help and make the world a better place. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.